We moved into the house at the beginning of summer, right when the days stretched long and the air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a new town, a bigger home, a chance for my son, Caleb, to make new friends. The house itself was old, but well kept, nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. Something about it made me uneasy, though. The walls felt too thick, the air too still, like it was holding its breath. But I ignored the feeling, blaming it on the exhaustion of moving. Caleb, however, loved it. "This house is awesome," he'd said the first day we arrived, running through the empty rooms. "There's even a secret room upstairs." That made me pause. A secret room? Yeah. He grinned, pointing toward the narrow hallway leading to the second floor. Behind the bookshelf. I frowned. We hadn't explored the house fully yet, but there was no mention of a hidden room in the realtor's description. Still, I followed him upstairs, his small feet thudding on the hardwood. Sure enough, in the hallway outside Caleb's new bedroom, there was a tall wooden bookshelf built into the wall. He reached out, pressing a hand against the side of it. With a soft click, the shelf swung open. Behind it was a small, dark space, too small to be a real room, more like a crawl space or an unfinished closet. Dust swirled in the air as I stepped inside. The space smelled damp, like something left to rot. On the walls, words had been carved into the wood. "Don't listen. Don't speak. Don't open the door." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "Whoa," Caleb whispered. "Cool." I didn't think it was cool. I shut the door to the crawl space and told myself we'd leave it alone. We should have left it alone. That night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. I sat up in bed, my breath caught in my throat. It was faint, just at the edge of hearing. A voice murmuring just beyond my bedroom door. My husband, Mark, was sound asleep beside me. The clock read 3:12 a.m. Slowly, I slipped out of bed, moving toward the hallway. The whispering stopped as soon as I stepped outside. I walked to Caleb's room. The door was open. I found him standing in the hallway, facing the bookshelf. "Caleb?" My voice came out a whisper, barely more than a breath. He turned to look at me, eyes wide, glassy. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The voice." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What voice?" He pointed toward the hidden crawl space, the one coming from inside the wall. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream. Caleb seemed fine, happily eating his cereal as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd heard. That afternoon, while Caleb was playing outside, I went back to the crawl space. I pushed the bookshelf open, feeling my heart pound in my chest. Inside, the air was thick, stale. I ran my fingers over the carvings in the wood. "Don't listen. Don't speak. Don't open the door." "What door?" As I turned to leave, I heard something. A small tap 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 against the wall. I froze. It sounded deliberate, rhythmic. Something, was knocking from inside the wall. I didn't sleep that night. The whispers grew worse. They came at night, always between 3 and 4 a.m. Some nights I would hear soft crying. Other nights, hushed laughter. But the worst was the knocking, always in threes. Caleb stopped talking about the crawl space. He stopped going near it entirely. And then, one night, I found him in bed with the covers pulled over his head, shaking. "Caleb?" I whispered, sitting beside him. He peeked out, his little face pale. "Mom, what is it?" His lips trembled. The voice in the wall, it knows my name now. My blood turned to ice. By the end of the week, I was ready to move. Mark thought I was overreacting. "Old houses make noise," he said. "Creaks, pipes shifting, whine through the walls." But I knew better. Then, on the last night, something happened that I can never explain. At 3:13 a.m., I woke up to a bang. I ran to Caleb's room. The bookshelf was open. The crawl space was empty. But Caleb was gone. Panic clawed at my chest. "Caleb!" I screamed, flipping on the lights. Then, I heard it, the knocking, from inside the wall. I pressed my ear to the wood, my pulse hammering. "Caleb? Baby, are you in there?" A weak voice answered. "Mommy." He opened the door. I felt my heart stop. "What door?" Caleb, what? Then, the knocking stopped, and so did his voice. We called the police. They searched the walls, the crawl space, every inch of the house. They found nothing. No secret rooms. No hidden doors. No Caleb. Just a house with thick walls and old bones, sitting silent at the end of the cul-de-sac. The case remains open. People still ask how a little boy could vanish without a trace. But I know the truth. The house took him, and somewhere, behind those walls, he's still knocking, still whispering, still waiting. We should have never taken the mirror. It started with an estate sale, one of those grand, overgrown mansions on the outskirts of town, where the air was thick with the scent of dust and forgotten history. My wife, Lillian, loved old things. She said they had stories in them. I never cared much for antiques, but I went along because it made her happy. The mirror sat alone in a dimly lit corner, its frame blackened with age, the glass strangely clear despite the dust-covered room. Something about it made my stomach twist. It was tall, almost 7 feet, with a carved wooden border depicting strange, twisting figures, bodies stretching unnaturally, mouths open in silent screams. Lillian ran her hand over the frame, her fingers tracing the carved figures with an almost hypnotic fascination. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "I think it's creepy," I said. She laughed. "That's because you have no taste." We took it home that evening. That was our first mistake. We placed it in the hallway outside our bedroom. That night, I had the worst dream of my life. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to move. The room was silent, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that feels wrong, like the world is holding its breath. Then I heard it, a faint rustling, like fabric brushing against wood. I tried to turn my head, but I couldn't. The sound grew louder. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Something was in the room with me. A shadow loomed over the bed, tall and thin, its arms too long, its fingers stretching toward me. I wanted to scream, but my throat was locked, my body frozen in place. It leaned in, its face inches from mine. Though I couldn't see its features, I felt it smiling. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I gasped awake, drenched in sweat. The mirror stood in the hallway, its glass gleaming in the dim light. Something felt off about its reflection. Like the room inside, it was a fraction of a second behind reality. I told myself it was a trick of the light. That was my second mistake. Over the next few weeks, strange things began happening. I would catch glimpses of movement in the mirror when no one was there, a flicker of something just out of sight. At night, I would hear faint whispers coming from the hallway, so soft I could almost convince myself I imagined them. And then Lillian changed. She stopped sleeping. Dark circles bloomed under her eyes, her skin growing pale. She became distant, distracted, often standing in front of the mirror for long stretches of time. I would find her staring at her reflection, unblinking. "Lil?" I would whisper, touching her shoulder. She would jump as if waking from a trance, her breath hitching in her throat. Sorry," she'd mumble, rubbing her temples. I must have spaced out, but it kept happening. And then, one night, I woke up to find her standing inside the mirror. At first, I thought I was dreaming. She was there, reflected in the glass, wearing the same nightgown she had gone to bed in, but the bed beside me was empty. "Lillian?" My voice cracked. She turned, slowly, her expression blank. I lunged for her, but my hands met solid glass. My reflection wasn't there, just her, trapped. A single tear slid down her cheek, and her lips moved. I couldn't hear her. I pounded against the mirror, screaming her name. Then, just as suddenly, she was back. I blinked, and she was lying in bed beside me, her breathing slow and deep, as if she had never moved. I gasped, shaking her awake. She groggily opened her eyes, confusion knitting her brows. "What's wrong?" she murmured. I could barely breathe. "You were in the mirror." Her expression darkened. "I had a dream," she swallowed. "I was trapped, and you couldn't hear me." Her voice trembled. "It wasn't a dream," I whispered. That was the moment we decided to get rid of it. The next morning, I carried the mirror to the garage, covering it with an old sheet. We agreed to take it back to the estate sale or donate it, anything to get it out of the house. That night, I woke up again. The air was heavy, thick with the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, and the mirror was back, standing in the hallway. I shot upright, my pulse hammering. "Lil." I shook her, but she wouldn't wake up. Then the whisper started, low, insistent. Something moved inside the glass. A shape. Not mine. Not hers. Something else. I reached out, slowly, pressing my fingers against the surface. The glass gave way, like water, and something pulled me in. I woke up the next morning with my face pressed to the cold hardwood floor. The mirror was gone. Lillian was gone. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. Then I heard her voice, faint, coming from inside the wall. "Help me." I clawed at the wallpaper, my fingernails scraping against the wood beneath. "Lillian!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. I pounded on the wall, but she was already gone. The house felt empty. I searched every inch of it. No doors, no secret rooms, no mirrors, just walls. Thick walls, holding something inside them. People ask what happened to my wife. I tell them she left me, that she walked out in the middle of the night and never came back. But that's not true. She's still here. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I hear her calling my name. A whisper, just beneath the surface. And sometimes, if I look into the reflection of a window, just for a second, I see her, standing there, watching, waiting, still trapped in the glass, still trying to find her way back. And I know, deep down, that one day, she will. And when she does, she won't be alone. We were never supposed to find the well. When my husband, Eric, and I bought the house, it was an old farmhouse on a few acres of land, tucked away from the city. The house itself was charming. Wooden beams, a wraparound porch, the kind of place people call quaint in real estate listings. The land, though, something about it always felt wrong. The trees were too still, the air too heavy, but the price was too good to pass up, and we told ourselves that the eerie feeling would fade once we made it our home. It didn't. And then, Caleb found the well. It was in the farthest part of the backyard, hidden behind thick, overgrown bushes. If Caleb hadn't been exploring, we might have never known it was there. "Mom, Dad, come see." His little voice was filled with excitement. I followed him outside, stepping through the high grass, pushing aside tangled branches. And then there it was, a stone well, ancient and crumbling, the mouth yawning open like a black hole in the earth. Something about it made my skin crawl. Eric frowned. "I didn't see this on the property listing." I shook my head. It wasn't there. But it had to be, right? Things like this don't just appear. We peered inside. The darkness seemed endless. "Is there water?" Caleb asked, trying to throw a rock inside. I grabbed his arm before he could. "We shouldn't mess with it," I said. "It's old. It could be dangerous." Eric agreed, and we decided to seal it. We should have sealed it that day, but we didn't. And that was our first mistake. That night, I woke up to the sound of dripping. I sat up in bed, my pulse quickening. It was faint, but unmistakable. Water, slow and steady, like something leaking into a basin. Eric was asleep beside me. The house was silent. I got up and followed the sound, heart pounding as I crept down the hallway. It was coming from outside, from the well. I stood at the window, staring at it in the moonlight. And then, a shadow moved inside it. I stopped breathing. Something was down there, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Caleb wouldn't stop talking about the well. "She says she used to live here," he said over breakfast, swinging his legs beneath the chair. Eric and I exchanged a glance. "Who?" I asked. Caleb shrugged. "The girl in the well." The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the plate. "Caleb, that's not funny." He frowned. "I didn't make it up." Eric sighed. "Bud, there's no girl in the well. It's just an old hole in the ground." Caleb stared at his cereal, quiet for a moment. Then he whispered, "She said you'd say that." A cold chill crept down my spine. That night, I locked all the doors and windows. I didn't know why. It wasn't like the well was going to come inside. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. At exactly 3:15 a.m., I woke up again. Drip, drip, drip. I clenched the blankets in my fists. It was louder this time. Closer. I sat up, and Caleb was standing at the window. My heart nearly stopped. Caleb! I rushed to him, pulling him back. His skin was ice cold. His little hands pressed against the glass, his breath fogging the window. "She's out there," he whispered. I didn't want to look, but I did. And in the moonlit yard, standing beside the well, was a girl in a white dress. Her head was tilted, her hair dripping wet, her bare feet sinking into the damp earth, and she was staring right at us. I grabbed Caleb and ran back to bed, locking the door behind us. I barely slept, listening for the sound of water dripping. It never came, but I knew she was still out there, waiting. The next day, Eric and I decided we were sealing the well. We gathered supplies, concrete, bricks, anything to fill it. But when we got to the backyard, the well was open. The heavy stones we had placed around it had been moved. Some had fallen inside, as if something had pulled them down. My stomach turned. I took a step forward and heard a voice. "Help me." Soft, distant, coming from the bottom of the well. I nearly tripped stepping back. Eric peered inside. "Jesus, is someone down there?" I shook my head. "It's impossible," Caleb said. I stopped myself, but Eric knew. We both did. We had to fill it. That night, the final night, the house felt different, like it was waiting, like something inside it knew. We put Caleb to bed early. Eric stayed in the garage, mixing the cement. And then, the lights flickered. The power died, and I heard the sound of water rushing. I turned toward the hallway and saw wet footprints, leading from the front door to Caleb's room. I ran. I threw his door open. His bed was empty. The window was wide open, and outside in the yard, Caleb was standing beside the well. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. Caleb was peering inside, his small hands gripping the stone rim. And then, a pair of hands reached up from the darkness and grabbed his wrists. I lunged, pulling him back just in time. The hands vanished. The well screamed, a sound so high, so inhuman, it rattled my bones. Eric came running. We grabbed Caleb, holding him between us as we backed away. And from the depths of the well, she crawled out. Her body was wrong. Long, thin limbs, her skin slick with water, her head lolling at an unnatural angle. Her mouth opened, black water spilling out. She reached for Caleb. "Come back," she gurgled. Eric threw the first brick. It struck her head with a sickening crack, but she barely flinched. I pulled Caleb back as Eric grabbed the cement bucket, pouring it into the well as fast as he could. The girl screamed. She lunged upward, her fingers just barely brushing Caleb's ankle. Then the cement swallowed her whole. The scream faded. The well sealed shut, and everything went silent. We moved a week later. We never spoke about what happened, but sometimes, late at night, I wake up to the sound of dripping, and I wonder, did we trap her down there? Or did we just let something else out? Because no matter where we go, no matter how far, I still hear her whispering Caleb's name. I never wanted to move back home. When my mother passed, I inherited the house I had grown up in. An old Victorian-style home that had always felt too big, too empty, even when I was a child. But life had a way of pushing me back. Divorce, debt, and the need to give my daughter, Rosie, a stable place to live. So we moved in. At first, things were fine. Rosie loved the sprawling backyard, the creaky wooden floors, and the little hidden nooks where she could hide and play. But as the weeks passed, I started to feel it again. That emptiness. The kind that wasn't just loneliness. The kind that made you feel like you weren't alone at all. The first time I heard the noise, it was just after midnight. A faint thumping sound, rhythmic, like something shifting above us. The attic. I told myself it was just the house settling, that old wood makes noise. But then I heard it again. Something dragging across the floor. Long, slow, like a body being pulled. I swallowed the lump in my throat and pulled the blankets over my head, convincing myself it was nothing. That was my first mistake. The next morning, Rosie sat at the breakfast table, swinging her legs. "Mommy!" she said through a mouthful of cereal. "I met the man in the attic last night." I froze. I forced a smile. "What do you mean, baby?" She took another bite, chewing thoughtfully. "He comes out when you go to sleep." My stomach dropped. "What does he look like?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She shrugged. "I dunno. He's tall, and his arms are really long, and his face is blurry." I felt cold all over. "And what did he say?" Her little fingers curled around her spoon. "He said I can go play with him soon." I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in bed, listening, waiting. At 1:27 a.m., the house went still. Then, thump. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was above me. I held my breath. Drag. A long, deliberate scrape of something heavy against the attic floor. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand, heart hammering as I stepped into the hallway. Rosie's bedroom door was open. My pulse pounded. I pushed the door wider. Her bed was empty, and the attic hatch was slightly ajar. A single strand of blonde hair caught on the wood. Rosie's hair. I ran. I grabbed the attic pull string and yanked. The ladder creaked down, revealing a gaping black hole above me. I climbed. My breath was coming fast, my hands slick with sweat. The attic was dark, the air thick with dust. "Rosie?" I whispered, the flashlight beam shaking in my grip. Then I saw her, standing in the farthest corner, her small hands clutching something. "Rosie!" I rushed forward, but she didn't turn. She was staring at something behind me. Slowly, my breath hitching, I turned the flashlight toward the shadows. And there he was. He was tall, his limbs too long, his fingers twitching at his sides. His face, it wasn't there. A swirling, shifting void where a face should be. The second the light hit him, he moved. Not walking, gliding, straight toward us. I grabbed Rosie and ran, nearly tripping as I scrambled down the attic ladder. I kicked it shut behind me, bolting to Rosie's room, locking the door. My hands shook as I pressed against the wood, heart slamming against my ribs. Silence. Then, a soft knock, just once, right above the doorframe, higher than any human could reach. Rosie buried her face in my chest, her tiny body trembling. "Mommy," she whispered, "he's smiling." The next morning, I called a contractor. "We need to seal the attic," I told him. He laughed. "Ma'am, it's just an attic." "Seal it," I repeated. I didn't care how much it cost. That afternoon, I watched as they nailed it shut, with slats covering the hatch, burying whatever was inside. Rosie never spoke of the man again, and for a while, things were quiet. Until last night. Rosie was asleep. The house was silent. Then, at 1:27 a.m., I woke up to a sound. Not above me, not in the attic, but inside the walls. A faint scratching. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging against wood. Then, a whisper, just outside my bedroom door. "Let me in. I am not staying here another night. I don't care if I have to leave everything behind, because the attic is sealed. But that thing, it never left. It's inside the house now, and it's getting closer." I first saw her on my walk home from work. It had been a long day, one of those shifts that felt like it would never end. I left the office well after sunset, my feet dragging on the pavement as I cut through the quiet back streets toward home. Then, in the reflection of a storefront window, I saw myself. Only, it wasn't me. I stopped. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned to look. There was nothing there, just an empty sidewalk, darkened windows, and the faint hum of streetlights overhead. I swallowed hard, shaking my head. I'm just tired. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. I would glance at my reflection in passing, bathroom mirrors, windows, my phone screen, only to notice small things that were off. A slight delay when I moved, my reflection turning its head just a little too slow. One night, I was brushing my teeth when I saw it clearly for the first time. My reflection, smiling at me. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't smiling, but she was. A slow, curling grin that spread across her face a second after I stopped moving. I stumbled back, my toothbrush clattering into the sink. My reflection just stood there, watching, waiting. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the smile was gone, and she was me again. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? But the more I ignored it, the worse it got. At work, I caught glimpses of her in the glass doors, watching me from across the office. At home, I would turn off the bathroom light, only to see her face lingering in the mirror a second too long. And then, she spoke. I had just climbed into bed when I heard it. A soft, familiar voice. "Let me out." I froze. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway. "Let me out." It was coming from the mirror. I sat up slowly, my body stiff with terror. The mirror across the room. There was someone standing in it. She looked like me, but her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep. She pressed her hand against the glass, fingers twitching. "You don't deserve this body," she whispered. My stomach turned to ice. "Let me out," she said again, smiling. I lunged forward, throwing a blanket over the mirror, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I took the mirror down. I locked it in the basement, but it didn't stop, because now I could feel her even when I wasn't looking. In the car window beside me, in the glass doors at work, even in the dull reflection of my own eyes. And then, one night, she got out. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of breathing. Not mine, someone else's. I sat up, my body rigid with fear. And there, standing at the foot of my bed, was her. She wasn't a reflection anymore. She was real. Her skin was the same as mine, her hair the same length, her voice identical when she spoke. But her eyes, they weren't mine. They were black holes, empty and endless. She smiled. "You left the door open," she whispered. My chest tightened. "No, I didn't." "Oh, but you did," she giggled. "You've been looking too long." She stepped forward. I scrambled back, pressing against the headboard. "What do you want?" She tilted her head. "To trade." My stomach churned. "You don't appreciate this body," she continued. "But I will." She lunged, and everything went dark. I woke up the next morning in bed. The sun streamed through the window. Everything was normal. But when I stood up, I felt different. I walked to the mirror, my hands shaking, and when I looked inside, it was empty. No reflection. No me. Just a blank, smooth surface. And behind me, in the corner of the room, a figure stood, watching, smiling, waiting. People still see me. They talk to me. They think I'm me. But I know the truth. The real me. She's still inside, trapped, watching from the other side of the glass, waiting for someone else to look too long, waiting for her turn to come back. Because one day, she will. And when she does, she won't be alone.